What we need to do is address what's on the minds of current cattle producers today. The number one long-term issue that producers have is, can we sustain the record high prices that we've been experiencing over the past 2 years? And the answer to that question is an unequivocal yes. We certainly can sustain those higher prices, provided that we do two things. Number one, we have to aggressively defend the competitiveness of our domestic marketplace, which is the number one beef consuming market in the world. It's right at our feet. It's the United States of America. This is the most important market to U.S. domestic independent cattle producers. Secondly, what we need to do is we need to aggressively defend the competitive advantage that U.S. producers have, not only in the domestic market, but in the global market as well. But in order to do this, independent producers need to realize that they're a part of a very profitable overall beef supply chain. For over a decade, cattle producers have been led by the motto that what's good for the beef industry is automatically good for the cattle producers. And unfortunately, that simply isn't true. And what cattle producers need to do is look at the overall beef supply chain and realize that it consists of various industry segments. You have the foundation of the industry represented by cow-calf producers and stockers and feeders, and then you have the formula feeders, then you move up to the packers, then you have the processors, the importers, the exporters, and then you have the wholesalers and the retailers. Tremendously profitable industry. But the situation is that there's a natural competition that occurs within this beef supply chain, and that competition is revealed between the interest of producers to sustain higher cattle prices and the interest of the downstream segment whose interest it is not to maintain these or sustain higher cattle prices. And so as we look at the downstream segment, clearly, if they're paying higher prices over long term for domestic live cattle, then they're going to have higher risks, and their margins are going to be potentially less. So there's a natural antagonism, a natural competition built within this overall segment. And the best way for producers to understand this, I think, is to first visualize themselves in the downstream segments of this industry. Put yourselves in the shoes of the packers. Put yourselves in the shoes of the processors and look at the industry from that perspective. And recently, the packers and other downstream segments have articulated their overall vision for the future of this industry, the direction they want this industry to go. And if we look at it from their perspective, what we find is one of the first things they want to do is they want to integrate the North American cattle herd, turn the United States cattle herd and the Canadian cattle herd and the Mexican cattle herd into an indistinguishable, integrated North American cattle herd. Now, if you think about it from the packers and processors' perspective, this makes sense, because anytime you can expand the available pool of inventories that you need in the processing industry, you will effectively reduce the volatility in pricing, and you will effectively reduce the potential for prices to increase over the period of time with this additional pool of cattle. So it's clearly in their best business interest to pursue an integrated North American cattle herd. Secondly, what the downstream segments would want is they would want to be able to differentiate their product in the marketplace, whether it be the domestic market or the international market. But they certainly would not want to differentiate that product based on country of origin labeling, because that conflicts with their desire to expand their available inventories or supplies. And what they will want to do, however, is differentiate their product based on their company name. Now, this makes sense if you're a downstream segment participant, because if you can differentiate your product based on your company name and ensure that is what consumers look for, regardless of the origins of the cattle that was used to derive or to produce the beef, that again is in the best interest, the economic interests of the packers and processors. Thirdly, what the packers and processors and other downstream segments would not want is for U.S. consumers to perceive U.S. cattle as superior in any way to any other cattle, whether they be from foreign competitors or not. And as a result of that, the downstream segments would be willing to compromise our health and safety standards in order to continually access and have an available supply of inventories from these other sources. And so they would want to push very quickly to reopen the border from Canada. And to do that, of course, Canada cannot meet current U.S. health and safety standards. And so because they can't meet the standards, the options available to the United States are if you're going to bring the cattle back in, you're going to have to lower our standards. And so you would find it is in the interest of the downstream segments to support that type of an approach. And finally, what the downstream segments would not want is the ability of all of these diverse independent cattle producers. About 800,000 of them were scattered across the United States. The packers and processors and importers and exporters would not want these independent producers to have easy access to trade remedy laws like anti-dumping laws, like countervailing duty laws. Obviously, if they did, this could limit or restrict their access to this new available supply of inventories that they've pursued. And so when we look at it from their perspective, it's very clear that they have a legitimate, justifiable business reason to pursue a four-point strategy that's going to advance their specific interests. But the fact of the matter is those interests are different. They're distinct from the interests of independent cattle producers who, again, are working to sustain the higher prices that we're experiencing today.